Kind of just have a sample of my portfolio, um, which is eventually the end result for this, right? So a portfolio is mostly about composition. It's about keeping attention. It's in many ways a brochure of your work, right? You're in a way showing off whether that is showing off your process, showing off your product, showing off sort of the skills and the experiences that you do have. So normally when you put a portfolio together, it's for a job, or it's for entry or admissions to another school, right? You can't see it right here, but here's my entire resume right at the beginning. So they know my name. Some people put a picture of themselves. I'm not really sure. I've kind of debated that just because it's like, why focus on the person rather than the skills of that person, right? But you'll see a lot of examples of people who put their image sort of on the first page. Um, so basically, I have a cover page and my contents page, which is all we'll really kind of be focusing for the first assignment. So for my class, the assignment will be basically the cover page, sort of your resume page, and then your contents page. So I've decided to make my contents page sort of picturesque. So there's kind of a snippet picture, the kind of money shot, kind of each project. Can't really see it on here too well, but if you guys do want to check it out, it's I'm screen recording and I'll upload it on YouTube, just so you can get an idea of how this is organized. So we can do a lot of different things. This is actually spreads. So these are all meant to be opened up. And the way I formatted this one was actually so when I went to an interview, I could show them on my computer because they wanted to just show a 25 megabyte sort of portfolio that was kind of, it's very general when you're working, but especially for schools, you'll have limitations such as you have to submit it digitally and it has to be under 25 megabytes. Which can be pretty complex because I think this one alone, I haven't formatted it correctly, but I think it's actually pretty big. Yeah, it's 85 megabytes. So I couldn't send that, right? And that's just the image quality of what I have and all the content and how many pages. And so there's a lot of things to do with it. But let's just dive right into it. So has anybody worked in InDesign before? Sweet. So it's not entirely different than the Adobe programs. A lot of the same commands, a lot of the same things, but a lot of different tools. So what InDesign is normally used for is not like manipulating photos like Photoshop, right? Each of these tools kind of help each other. So InDesign is really just the organized tool. It's the composition tool. It's the accurate tool that'll help you basically make a magazine. And actually a lot of the graphic designers and a lot of people who make presentations, I can assure you that they're using InDesign for most of it. So to begin, we have three different options. So some of you guys will be making a book, but this isn't exactly what it means. So I always select document because we can always go back and make it into a book, and it's a lot easier to format the things that we want to do for our portfolio with the document. So it has tons of options. And in my latest option, or in the latest InDesign CC, once I make changes here, it'll actually start to make changes in the background, which is kind of neat. So you could do number of pages, your start page, obviously pretty obvious stuff. So if it needed to be 25 pages, then you have your page size. So the important thing about our portfolios is usually they're in someone's hand. So you don't want it to be too small so you can't see the images, and you don't want it to be really too big because that kind of adds up. It looks nice and it's good for your pictures. It really just depends on how you want it to feel. So you're going to have to kind of measure out even a piece of paper, even a piece of trace paper, kind of cutting out different sizes to see what works. Seeing if you could fit 2 pages per 11 by 17. Try and be economical with it instead of being like, man, I'm going to have a golden ratio. I always tried to do the golden ratio for my portfolio because I thought it'd be nice. But of course, the golden ratio could be scaled at at all different proportions, right? So I chose like 9.25 inches by 5.5 inches. And that was because it fit on, I could fit two of them on 11 by 17 or three, right? So just things to think about. So we can set up a width and automatically its units are in points. But what's great about Adobe is I can say 11 inches and it'll stay in inches. I can go to height and it'll be, let's say 6 inches, and it'll change it for me. I want 25 pages. You can set this up in columns. It really doesn't matter. You can actually switch all these settings once you're in the document, but it's kind of nice to get them all out of the way if you know what you want to achieve. So we have the bleed and slug, and those are kind of things that you can play around with, and you'll sort of notice what it's doing. So you can see this little keychain lock. This locks the proportion of, you can kind of see that purple line, how it kind of moves, right? So it's uniform. If I wanted to change that and change the organization of even just the margins, I could set that, individually as well. So inside, outside, bottom, and top. Top, inside, outside. Bleed and slug. These are more for when you're printing, and depending on the print size. So we can do a lot of things when we print and when we set up for this to be cut. I'll dive into that a little bit more later when you start to print and whatnot and show you what actually happens. So we'll press OK. And we pretty much just have a blank. So you'll notice the cover page, and then sequentially we have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on, right? So we have a number of tools. Just like Adobe Photoshop or Illustrator, we kind of have the same thing. I always go with the essentials because generally it has what we need. But obviously you're welcome to look through all of these, right? So they all have different things we could do. It's hard to really teach these programs because they are so massive. There's so many tools to this thing. But what I'm going to show you real quick is just how you can start to set up your own composition, right? So there's tools we can use, such as like Command R or Control R, that can control the units of our drawing. I like to put mine in inches. Some people put points or millimeters. I have no idea what an agate is, but apparently it's a unit of measurement. So I'll put mine in inches, and you'll see that it keeps 0 right down the middle, which is nice, right? Because that's for your book. And so when you think about a book and it opening, if you have an image that goes right up to that line, what's going to happen to it when it opens up? You're not going to see it. So you kind of have to account for that. You have to kind of, what I did all the time is I printed it out, even just the basic format that I want, and saw how it folded. Folded a bunch of times, and I was like, okay, well, I got about ½ an inch that I need to come out of this because my spiral or deciding what kind of seam you want to do can automatically already start changing these things, right? So we can set up the organization from the get-go. We don't have to copy the same organization over and over again. We can actually set up a lot of things using pages. So off to the side, if you go to pages, there's this thing called a master, and the one that says none is actually your cover page. So if you double click on the master, this basically applies whatever you do to this to every single sheet. You can obviously change that. I'll show you how it kind of works. So let's say I bring in a ruler. I know that I want my text to be here. I got something like this. I think you guys saw an example where one of the students left this line that constantly goes through the whole thing. So I can take like a line, put it there. We could do something like Christopher's portfolio, if I knew how to spell. I could obviously make that bigger. And we could change my font to my cool Maven font. So you'll notice things like this where it brings up like a little red error. So this is red, you guys probably can't tell. But basically it's trying to tell you that in that box that some of your text is missing, right? We see it all the time in different programs. What's kind of nice is even more than Illustrator, like, okay, so Photoshop, I would never put text in it, right? I would only stick to pixels and pixelated geometries, right? In Illustrator is where maybe I put it in my text, but InDesign probably has the best rendering quality of your text. It is perfectly vectored to your printer, so it's never going to be pixelated at all. So anytime that you do text or when you're adding text, if you already have your hand drawing in your images, that's fine, right? And that's going to change scale based on how big the image is for your portfolio, right? But it's not a bad idea to keep text in mind. Just in a quick example, I have super tiny text that you can barely see in my portfolio, and that's actually part of the image, right? So what I can do about that is I can add over, text that supports, whether it's the name of the project, my professor, what year it was. Sometimes I like to put like it was a 6-week project, so the person looking at it goes, okay, well he did this in 6 weeks, or oh man, he only had 3 weeks for this project. That way they kind of know the scale to judge your work. So just as some suggestions, what I like to do is usually diagram and then sort of money shot images. And this is kind of up to you guys, complete interpretation. Again, start with a money shot. I usually use the title. This one actually says like really bold and then a little bit lighter. It shows the professor and whatnot. I have sort of my process, all the process, and then eventually turns into a plan. So I usually like to go from process to product, right? Which we have plenty of. We have all of our process sketches, and then our final sections and all of our final drawings usually kind of lead them towards the end. That way they can kind of see how it builds up and turns into this product. Anyway. So I have this, and I have all my weird little lines, right? If I press the key W, I can see what it looks like in preview, which is really nice because what InDesign does also is it helps your computer out. So these images can be really big and whatnot. You can set the quality to each image that we put in. So this is my master page, and this is obviously going to go on every single page. So maybe I don't want it to say Christopher's portfolio on every single page. So I could do something like project title. Even though I don't know which one I'm doing yet, I know and can set this to be, whatever, and that'll always stay. If I hold Alt, you'll see it doubles up. See that little ghost? And I can drag this and basically copy it. I can drag it again, drag it again. So this could be like part of the project or, whatever. I could also set up things for my images. So what I like to do is even just a frame tool. I set up to where my picture is going. This is just a placement of where my picture is going to go, right? That way I know that on every single image or every single page that whatever image, my money shot or whatever, it's going to be lined up, right? So when somebody scrolls on the computer, they don't see this sort of crap. You don't really see it when you open up a book, right? If you were to flip through it really nicely, you might see a little bit of movement. You guys know what I'm talking about? Like when you scroll through a really rough PDF and there's this guy who's trying to keep the same image over and over again, and it's very annoying and it looks unprofessional, right? And there's simple ways to get around those things and to show your professionalism. So we have these, these are kind of too big. You'll notice it's selecting the one in the back, so I can press L. So what L does is lock. So if you guys haven't written it down yet, W is final mode. So I can switch back and forth to see all those lines go away and see. It obviously looks a lot different, right? And it's a really quick way of seeing what you're doing, taking its effect. So cool. I'll take that. Kind of want it on every page. So this will be my process page, and then say I want it to kind of match. So I'll hold Alt again, and this time I'll hold Shift, and you'll notice what Shift does, right? It keeps everything orthogonal. So I can either go vertically or horizontally, and basically just make a copy of that. So you'll see little lines that come up for InDesign, which are really helpful. So I don't know if you guys saw it, but there was a little purple midpoint line that knows the exact midpoint of that piece of paper, whether it's horizontally or vertical, right? So go ahead and line those up, right? If it's supposed to be in the center, let's make it center, because we have the tool to make it accurately center. Same thing with text. So of course, just like, it's basically PowerPoint, Microsoft Word on steroids, right? It's made to be for publishing, right? So that you can change every little thing. So you'll notice with each text, I can do so many different options, whether it's on center, whether it's to the right. So basically those control, just so you can guys see, that's based on this box. So whatever, this box can also become a part of your composition to the grid, right? So you can keep text in check, per se, right? So they can all match up. We'll put these over here. I kind of want my picture. So if I wanted it to be like the exact opposite and mirrored of this one, I could transform just like I can in Photoshop. So whenever I right click on anything in InDesign, there is a crap load of options. There's transform, there's move, scale, whether I want to rotate it, if I flip it horizontally, it gives me an actual mirrored of that, right? So instead of just mirroring the whole thing, I can do text effects that I couldn't normally achieve, right? Like, I guess I could do it in Photoshop, but it'd be kind of, there's a lot more process to it. This is just kind of one click, and kind of gives the effect of sort of the mirror press. I don't know. Just a lot of different things you can do. So let's take that again. So it works kind of like Illustrator. When I hold Shift, it'll add to my composition versus Control. Maybe not. Okay, yeah, it's still Shift. So Shift is kind of your main control between adding to your selection or subtracting from your selection. So I'll move that over here. I'll keep it like that. So since I did this on my master page, if I go, say, to all my pages, right, now it's on every single page. And now these are all perfectly lined up with the way that I want it, right? So this is like my project title, got my main image, and now I have it on every single page. What's really nice about it is I can't accidentally change it, right? It's actually staying there. So there's ways around that too. So say this is kind of in the way, I really don't need it on this page, right? So if I hold, and you guys, I want to keep this in mind, hold Shift and Alt at the same time. Or for myself, it's Command and Shift. So on Windows, it's Control Shift. On Mac, it's Command Shift. But that will allow you to basically edit this. So I can go, I don't need it. Still can't click on anything. So when in doubt, if you can't click on something, hit Control. It can be the most frustrating thing in the world, because honestly, when I was first learning this, it was a great tool, but I got so pissed off because I was like, okay, great, what have I done? I can't move anything. So basically, I'm starting with my basics, right? So now I got this on every page. I don't want this on my cover page, so I'll kind of just get rid of it. And so I can edit all these now. But maybe I want to keep, this. I kind of want to switch this to Portfolio Christopher, So let's do that. It's too big. Stretch it out. Kind of neat. Starts to, obviously correlates between here and here, right? Let's get out of, so when I unpress W, it kind of looks like a mess, right? So it's always good to kind of, to view how you're doing, if that makes sense. So now that we got our organization, we got things set up, we got some lines that we want, we know how things are going to at least sort of construct on our page, right? This is sort of just a made-up composition. Honestly, for you guys, I would set up the first 3 pages, print it out, see what it looks like, kind of give yourself comments, ask me, ask Pedro. We'll give you plenty of comments of how you should possibly structure this, or talk to us about how you want to structure it, right? We'll give you some ideas.
Yeah, I think the Chris is showing is definitely super essential. The idea of understanding that you have master pages that you can apply to different sheets, whether that be a chapter insert page, whether that be a cover, a back cover, a title page for a project. You set those things up, and all of a sudden it becomes a game of drag and drop.
Right.
And editing that title, editing that text, and that's something you can do quickly if your stuff's curated, right? So yeah, you're going to show them how to do multiple pages, and InDesign is super intuitive. So it's just a matter of learning the way things and using that to your advantage.
Absolutely. So what's nice about this is, since I've set it up over every page, I no longer have to remember how my title page was, or remember how I lay out my subcategory page, right? But I can still change them. So say this page, I just want it to be entirely an image. So I can basically delete anything I don't want out of the template that I already made. So now we got our organization. We know how we generally want to set up. We know that we have our white space for basically our booklet. And now that it's all set up, I need to put my images in. So I don't really have any images set up. Let's see. Here we go. So what's interesting and what's great about InDesign is it keeps track of all your files. So this is super important, guys. Actually, I'll go over it first. You wanna save your file, and you wanna keep track of it, right? I don't know how many folders I have that are called Architecture Portfolio, Architecture Portfolio 2, Architecture Final, whatever, right? Grad Portfolio. I have about 9 different portfolios now that I had to go back about a year ago and start reorganizing the 3 terabytes of files that I have for all of my schooling, right? And I wish I would have organized it a lot better and named everything accordingly. I mean, I did now because I looked at every image, but if you do it now, you're going to save yourself so much time and help yourself so much when you got to find that file, right? I know it sounds really silly, like, okay, name your files, but guys, it's super important. So what we'll do, and what's crazy about InDesign is it actually links all your files. So anything that I put into my portfolio, it's actually linked to Chris Verette's hard drive or Chris Verette's Dropbox, right? It's actually linked to those files. So if that file goes missing from the link, it'll disappear from your InDesign. Does that all make sense? So basically the way that I found around that is to create a folder, and anything that I put in my portfolio is usually, I've basically formatted it in such a way to where, it's a small image anyway. It's not, my 250 megabyte PDF, right? It's not my whole composition. It's my section drawing that I've worked in Photoshop and got down to about 5 or 6 megabytes, right? So when I create a folder for my InDesign, I'll actually do something like this. So just for an example, we can say portfolio. We'll create a new folder, presentation, or like what I'm doing right now. I'll create a new folder, call it images. Obviously you can see where I'm going with this. Model pictures. And you know, I could get really detailed with the organization of this, right? Which is kind of up to you. You know, it helps to do it for like in the scanning process that you guys are in right now. How many of you guys scanned and it says JPEG underscore 001 005 TIFF whatever? Go ahead and label those, right? This is the time to do that. That way I can put it into my images, my model pics, and save it forever. That being said, when I place my images, I'd want to place them out of that linked folder, right? So here's all my images. I'd want to make a copy of this and actually put it in my images, model pics, whatever, right? So now I know where all the linked files are for my InDesign, right? So when I place them into InDesign, I won't place them from where I got them. I'll place them from the specific folder that I have. So let's see, I got some of my artwork here. And you guys don't laugh, this is like freshman artwork. Actually, some of this is pretty good. So I can select all my images, and I can actually just drag it right in. Minimize that. So you'll notice nothing happens. And what's kind of I like about the Mac is that nothing happens until I'm actually in the screen. So you'll see it brings up a little thumbnail. And it has a little number, which happens to be the 8 images that I selected. So what I can do, and these will come in at full format, so they'll usually be huge. So what I like to do is place them all at once. These are all too big, but I like to do it all at the same time. So some of these are huge, right? I got one image that's the size of my entire portfolio. And then I have these other ones that I've already formatted for my portfolio. So what I can do, I can either leave this one hanging or hold shift and just make them smaller. So you'll notice what happens is it only made my bounding box smaller, right? So in InDesign you have a bounding box, but then you also have an image box. They probably have technical names, but I've always known it as blue box and brown box. Brown box is the image, blue box controls the organization of that image.
It's basically a frame. Like you control
Right.
the size of the frame, and then you control the size of the actual image within the frame. And the relationship of those is there's multiple ways that you can that InDesign lets you manipulate those.
Right. So what I like to do is, since these are all to their own scale, I like to right click, and there's this thing called fitting. So I can fit it, and what that means is basically fitting to my frame the image. So I can fill frame proportionally, which means it holds the constrictions of my image. I can frame content proportionally. Okay, so fill frame proportionally, it fills to the frame proportionally, right? And then the content proportionally will keep the image proportion.
But it'll take whatever the biggest proportion of the image, it'll take it out to that frame.
Right.
But say if your frame is portrait and your actual content is landscape, then the right and left edges are going to hit that frame. You're going to have a bunch of blank space, right? So you're filling the frame proportionately by fitting the content.
Absolutely.
Opposed to filling the frame proportionally.
So I'll go ahead and show you both what they do. So you got fill frame proportionally. If I go back, and fill content proportionally. Since I actually scaled my frames at the same rate, those technically do the same thing right now. So here's one of my paintings. I could put that on this page. You know, it's kind of big. You'll notice if I move my frame, I'm now shrinking my image, right? That's not the whole part of my image. So I can right click, fitting, and fill frame proportionally, and there comes back my image. Which is really great for, say I wanted to cut this object in half, right? I hold Alt and copy it over and over again, and I can easily do, so you'll see that brown frame that comes up. this is basically so I can move the whole image within this frame. So if I just do that real quick, and let me zoom in for you guys. So I can either control the image, which I don't want, or I can select this little circle that comes up and literally drag it and show all the stages of my painting, right? Pretty simple. I didn't have to Photoshop it, I didn't have to crop it. I basically could use the exact same image 3 times, right? And what's nice about InDesign is that it scales your computer to where it's not having to do all the thinking at once. So what this does is kind of like Rhino, it doesn't do all the thinking at once, right? When you render, then it really starts to push the computer power. InDesign does the exact same thing. So if you were to go to like view, there's things called screen mode, which is normal, which is what we have. Preview, which shows you a preview. But then also you can do display performance, which if you have a really good computer, I always use high quality display because I like to, it'll do weird things to your lines and you'll start to think like, man, is my floor plan wrong? No, it's just InDesign breaking it down for you. The reason why I keep explaining this so much is because it can start to mess with your head, and which is why I constantly go back and forth and use my display settings to kind of make sure I'm getting the product that I want.
Yeah, the display settings really help. If you're trying to move fast, you'll see that the really crappiest one doesn't even show you the image. It just shows you like an X in your box. Fast display, yep.
Right.
So this helps you if you've got a really loaded file, you've got gigabytes and gigabytes of stuff, you can zoom through this content pretty quickly. But if you set it to high display, you're going to see every single pixel. I mean, it's going to be super high def, and your project, your portfolio file will move at a snail's pace. So typically, kind of like that middle range, you'll see pictures get pixelated, and that's fine. That's not how they're going to print. That's why you switch through the display mode so you can see the final version of what it'll actually look like. So it's just to help you sort of move through this pretty quickly, even though you've got, huge files.
So another thing you'll notice too is when you have images that are similar to each other, it'll actually bring up these little green lines. I don't know if you guys can see it, but those lines are basically trying to help you line up those images, right? So if that's what we want to do, let's do that. So say I wanted to have these in a perfect square. Well, I can line this one up perfectly with that one. I can get that measurement and that measurement, right? I can have those so when that they print that they look totally correct, right? Perfectly symmetrical with each other. Another thing that I can do to achieve that is literally just grab my ruler. So just in this space, click and drag down. And I could start to line those up also too. And go in W mode and make sure that it's all correct. So one thing you'll notice is we get lost in the computer scale, right? So this image, and InDesign can tell us exactly how big it is, but it might be too small, right? So we can see right now that this is between, it's about 4 inches. So 1, 2, 3, maybe about 3 inches in total.
I think if you select it, it'll tell you up top what the dimensions are depending on your.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Their height and width. So it's about 1.8 inches.
Badass.
So those are pretty small, right? So you gotta do test prints in these things. You gotta, make a modification, print it out. You guys print here for free. I think that's incredible. So you guys need to be milking that. Like seriously. When you go to any other school, they're gonna charge you for every single print. Black and white letter. In a color quarter. It's ridiculous. But you guys get to print for free, so print it 100 times and look at it 100 times.
Another thing, just some helpful tools for when you select something. So say you have something selected, you can do the same kind of thing in Photoshop where you hold shift. If I were to make this bigger and I hold shift, you'll notice it only changes the frame, and then I'd have to do a second step. Or if I hold control or alt, I actually it's Control on Windows, Command. If I hold Shift and Control at the same time, it'll change that whole image for me without me having to reshape it, right? So there's a lot of different little tools, especially with the keyboard and using it at the same time, that you're gonna honestly pick up on your own. You'll be like, holy crap, I've been wasting hours of my life.
If you hold Alt as well, it'll make it bigger, but about the center. So it'll scale it from the center as opposed to the opposite corner of where you grab it from. So you hold Alt, Shift, Control, and Alt. You get that effect.
Right. So if you guys have never been to Lubbock, that's what it looks like. So say we got all my dragged and dropped images, we got all my projects, everything's kind of set, and I wasn't sure if I was going to go into printing, just because it's kind of a mess in itself. You'll figure out a lot of things in itself. But basically, Control P, Command P, we have a lot of different settings to print, and for good reason. So we do a lot of testing, especially for prints, for magazines, right? They don't exactly print out the entire magazine at a time, right? So there's a lot of different options for setting this up, and I'll just generally kind of go over them. So we have pages, obviously, is every single individual page. Spreads, which is going to mean this, sort of like what you saw with mine, is the entire 2 pages put together. Print layers, you're going to want to, so you can set your layers to print or not, which is kind of dangerous. It's good if you're creating templates, but honestly, I like to know what's going to print at all times. It's just kind of just so you can either print all your notes. So people would usually put notes in a non-printable layer, that way so-and-so doesn't say, hey, you spelled red wrong, and then it comes out on the magazine print. We got print master pages, like say I wanted to show my professor, how my organization was going. We got setup for the paper size, marks and bleeds. So all these kind of do different things. Like crop marks are really nice because it'll actually scale my drawing with 2 little basically marks on each corner. That way I know exactly where to cut each page. It can be helpful. It really just kind of depends what you're doing, and I'll sort of output this so you guys can see what that looks like. Document, not really sure what this is. I'm sure we could look it up on Google if I really wanted to know. We have our different resolutions, but most oftenly, there's usually actually presets here. Since I don't actually have any computer printers set up, it really depends. Like say you have this one set up on the computer, it's going to have different options, right? It's going to have different capabilities of how it can print on a piece of paper. Like you guys have heard of borderless painting or borderless printing, where the printer head can extend to the tip of the page. Those are just really minute things that you're going to run into. There's really no way for me to go over every error that you're ever going to encounter, but it's a setup. So we'll press save, and that's how I would print it. So you can print directly from InDesign, or you can export it into a PDF so we can see what it looks like, right? So there really is no save as PDF or a certain file. Anytime that you save or save as, it's going to be an InDesign file, which is kind of like your Photoshop file. It's going to hold all your layers, it's going to hold all your images, everything like that. That's not exactly what we want. So we can go to File, Export. And here's where we get our options, right? So we have Adobe PDF, Interactive, we got Print, and obviously a bunch of different things. We can go into JPEG images, PNG, a lot of different options, but I'll choose Adobe PDF, Print. So interactive would be if you were going to put it on the web or you're going to digitally submit it, it's going to compress your images better for the screen, right? And then so if you choose print, it's going to compress it better for the printer. Subtle differences, but the trained eye does notice. So we'll save it as port faux sample. Put it on my desktop. I got a folder for it somewhere.
So I think that what Chris was trying to get you all to do at the beginning is really helpful to set up a folder that will hold all the things that you're placing into your portfolio. There's a really important tool that I think y'all all should know from InDesign is when you're basically done with this thing, you want to package it, right? Just like Chris said, InDesign borrows these files from other folders on your computer, and it always references them, right? So if they go missing, then you're SOL, right? All of a sudden you gotta go on a crazy hunt for that one file, right? What he told you is good for if you're anticipating the dimensions and you already know sort of how to format your pictures and stuff. But if you're sort of going at it sideways or sort of dropping stuff as you go along, at the end of the day when you're done, it's really good practice to package your file. And what that does is it grabs and it creates copies from everywhere borrowed from without you physically having to do each one. And it puts them in a links folder and it creates a link. It creates a folder with all those links in it, and it also creates a PDF for you, high quality, and it saves that InDesign file not only in its native program, whether it be CC 2017, 2015, whatever it may be, but also in IDML, which is another file type, which you can open backwards. So you can open that in an earlier version of InDesign. So if something happens and you lose your InDesign, you have to open it on another computer, you can still open that file, and you've got those links. Right. So save those and make sure that every time you finish that you package this thing. I mean, it even has like a text folder that you can create to give people instructions on how to print this thing.
Absolutely. So package is found in the same scroll bar as like save or export. What's really nice about it is kind of like what Pedro was saying, is it puts it all together in one spot for you, like really nicely. Not to say you shouldn't be organized in the first place, but it's just well that you know the tools are there. So kind of like what we were mentioning, that these things are all linked, I kind of wanted to show you because I'm going to get a million questions. Say you do have a file missing, right? So if I delete one of these, actually for my presentation, not my presentation, InDesign tutorial, you'll see if I delete these, it shouldn't link up. So it knows that I have 3 of those. I guess it automatically linked it anyway. Anyway, if you do have a missing link, it'll show you basically in your links, right? It'll bring up a little message. And if you right click on the image, you can still search for, a replacement folder. Or if you find the folder yourself, or generally where you think it's going to be, what's cool about InDesign is you can select that folder and it'll look through it for you. But if it's JPEG number 023 and you have 40 JPEG number 23s, it'll select a random one and it'll put something you probably don't want there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and that's if you haven't changed the file name, right? Another great thing about the links in InDesign is that natively it's part of the Creative Suite, and so these are live links. So I can grab a Photoshop file and drop it into my presentation. I can grab an Illustrator file and drop it into my presentation. If I find out that I have to make a modification, I can open the original file, modify it in Illustrator, and save it, and InDesign will know that I changed it, and it'll ask me if I want to update that link. And when I do, I don't have to re-drop it in, I don't have to re-proportion it, I don't have to do anything. It's going to update it for me with the proportions that I've set already. So use those to your advantage. If you're working in Photoshop, Illustrator, InDesign, all 3 at the same time, it's going to help you. So update those as you go, and don't be afraid to make changes because you can always update them without much more work.
Another thing that's great about InDesign is that it knows each of these files. It knows what they are and what they can be edited by. So if you do have Adobe Illustrator and Adobe Photoshop, you can actually keep the images where they are. Like say you notice once I put these up, you're like, oh man, that looks like crap. It still needs more white in the background. I need to just see the object more. I need to Photoshop it a little bit better. I can highlight them, basically edit with, and go right to Photoshop, right? Basically click on that, and it's gonna open up my Photoshop file. And once I save it in Photoshop, it's gonna automatically change my InDesign and make those changes. So here's that. Here's the change that I want. Needs to be a little better. Wow, that's way better. Put some levels on it. Actually, I want it to be black and white. File, save. It's going to save it in the same spot so that when I go over here, it changes. Pretty useful, right? That way I don't have to find it again. I got to put it all the way back. So sometimes it's nice to even just, if you know you still have editing to do, that's okay, right? You can put it in InDesign and edit it later. If that happens to be the time frame that you're in, like, oh man, I got to put this stuff down. I know I'm only going to be able to edit like 5 of them, so let's get it all down and see which ones I got to edit. You know what I mean? Other than that, I think this is a pretty basic tutorial for you guys to at least get started. Start playing around with it. You're gonna learn a lot more just messing around with it and asking us questions anyway. But as of right now, do you guys have any questions?
It's a lot to process, but there are tons of tutorials online. Obviously, we're not here all the time at your disposal, but feel free to poke around online. There's a lot of tutorials setting these up. I mean, you guys are not the only architecture students out there putting your portfolio together on InDesign.
Oh, yeah.
So I would invite you to exploit those resources.
If you type in architectural portfolio pretty much anywhere, you're gonna see some examples, of how other people are doing it. You might get a little sad that your skills aren't there yet. Honestly, there's people who they don't know how to draw. They know how to do this better than a lot of people in the world. But it's great because they're there and we're there. They're there so we can learn from them, right? So let's not copy them, but hey, is this a good idea, Professor? Hell yeah, it is. Let's do that. How do you do that? Well, I don't know. Let's figure it out.
Yeah, and a lot of these, like Chris is saying, you go online and you look for architecture portfolios. If you go to issue.com, it's a really great resource. Almost everybody posts their stuff on issues nowadays. And so it's a good place for you and your friends to check out each other's work. But it's a good place for you to direct potential employers, like, hey, I know I can't send you this 40 meg file, but here's a link to my issue online, and you can click through it. And they do pretty good work, and you can even send it to print from issue.com.
Exactly.
And Blurb is another great resource. So
Blurb.
I think we want to show you guys those sorts of things, but probably towards the end of the semester, maybe next semester, we'll get into all that. But right now, I think you guys have the skills so far to at least start dropping in your work.
That concludes the tutorial.